You know, I usually make a lot of complaint videos on War Tycoon and things that the game really needs to improve on or is struggling with, but that's simply because I do believe the game to have a lot of potential. It just has this feeling to it. Therefore, in today's video, guys, I'd like to go over some things which I've never actually went over, and that's gonna be the positives of this game, the things that this game does really well, because we don't all play this game because of the issues it has. Obviously, we play it because of the positives that it has that really do outweigh the negatives, so today I will be covering just that. But anyway, before we start, I would really appreciate if you subscribed. We're on the way to 50,000 subscribers. So the first thing I'm going to be moving into is semi-realistic graphics, but also modeling as a whole. I believe War Tycoon does pretty well when it comes to realistic graphics. However, in a way, they do also have to sacrifice the FPS in order to achieve them. Like right here, when I'm in a private server, I'm obviously at around 100 FPS, but when I do go in a public server and just a lot of things start happening, I'm kind of dropping to around 50 to 60. Except what I realize is that War Tycoon really does sacrifice on the FPS point to give us the best possible experience when it comes to graphic settings as a whole. It is very unique compared to other Roblox games in this way. Along with this, one more thing which I really do like about the graphics themselves is that they do really put in a lot of effort in the models. I really love almost every single model which they make in the game, and a lot of them really do look highly realistic. There are some others which are outliers which don't really make sense. However, that's only really 5% of the game. The other 95% is really good when it comes to modeling. Like, just take a look at this detail. I really do appreciate how much time and effort they do put into this. I don't think any other Roblox game does it better than them when it comes to this, and that's why I assume a lot of people play this game other than anything else. Now, the next thing which I'd like to move into is going to be frequent balance changes. I think War Tycoon does really well when it comes to changing the meta every few updates. Every update we receive, we basically get a lot of balance changes, which really do kind of flesh things out because there are a lot of vehicles which do struggle with balance. However, War Tycoon is almost always really fast to fix that. The recent few updates, we haven't received that many balance changes really. However, when there is a problem, War Tycoon does attempt to fix it when it comes to balance. I do think the planes themselves are still a little bit imbalanced in this game because they're just way too weak and they nerf them too much. However, other than this, I don't think any other balance changes which this game has done were really that controversial, to be honest with you. I think they do a really good job at trying to fix a lot of issues which this game has when it comes to balance itself. Now, the next thing which I really like is the power dynamics themselves and the way in which a lot of vehicles just counter each other out. For example, let's take the tanks right here. We got the Abrams X that's really good at fighting other tanks, and it specifically counters planes because that's what the tanks are really good for in this game. They can shoot planes out the sky without any issues. However, due to the issue of the hitboxes that the helicopters have, the helis can simply counter the tanks, so the tanks are not even able to do much about them. And then, for example, another vehicle which we could take right here is the helicopters. They are really good at fighting tanks. They're good at fighting planes. However, they get countered by anti-air ships in a lot of the cases. And then next up over here, we obviously have the ships. They're really good at fighting air vehicles, specifically planes and helicopters. However, they get countered by ground vehicles and artillery systems quite a lot. The next up, we could even talk about the submarines. The submarines are really good at fighting planes and helis. However, they get countered by ships. The cycle kind of repeats, and it's honestly a really nice way in which they do it. I very much like this game's meta because there isn't really a definitive vehicle class that's the best out of all. Every single vehicle class is kinda good at everything. I feel like the only one that's specifically struggling right now is obviously the planes after the nerf, but I do believe they're probably going to be making some changes to that at some point. They always do. Now, the next thing which I'd like to move into really quick is going to be how good the developers actually are at keeping us informed with the things that are coming out in the updates. They're really transparent when it comes to giving us information about the updates themselves. Like, this Discord server and the devlog channel is always filled up with a lot of information about what's going to be coming. They talk about things in detail. They tell us perhaps sometimes their update plans. They host somewhat frequent polls and tell us things that are gonna be coming somewhat soon. It's genuinely a decent way in which they interact with us as a community. The only one issue that I have is that whenever there is a drama, they don't really address it this much. They kind of just ignore it, but other than this, when it comes to transparency itself and telling us about the updates, they're really good at doing this, unlike some any other games. And another thing which I'd like to quickly go over is how quickly this game also likes to update. Their updates schedule is around 2 updates per month, and they also do 1 paid limited a month. It's not something that really changes. They keep this schedule very consistent, and we can actually know when to expect an update. Now moving into the main reason why people actually play this game, and in my opinion that's going to be the satisfying PvP system itself. But genuinely every move which you perform with any vehicle just feels so smooth as a whole. The gameplay itself, the movement, the PvP, it's just all of it kinda adds up in a perfect way. Now the one thing which we can definitely not forget is the amount of weapons which this game has to offer. Every single vehicle type has so much new to offer whenever you unlock it, and there's just so much to explore, so much mechanics, all the different weapons do different things. I just really love how this game's cycle kind of flows. But anyway, the next thing which I'm gonna be moving into is gonna be the simplicity of the game. So this game used to be a lot harder to understand whenever it used to be Oil Warfare Tycoon, I believe around 4 years ago. However, now as you kinda jump in the game, it actually becomes a semi-realistic combat system in a way, but then also at the same time, they also try to keep it really simple for the people to kinda understand. And I believe that to be the best when it comes to ground vehicles and tanks specifically. I think these vehicle types as a whole are just super easy to kind of get the understanding of. Like the ground vehicles, what you kind of use them for is for raiding people's bases, perhaps fighting each other, fighting tanks, and sometimes being able to engage air vehicles. It's nothing too difficult to understand. If a wire-guided missile locks onto the person, then you know, okay, when it's green, you need to shoot it. When there's a guy, you obviously just click your mouse and follow them. There's nothing really too specific that you need to do. If you want to actually make the game a lot more interesting for yourself, then you could start using the environment and start using different strategies which you learn along the way. The icons and the visuals themselves also make it a lot easier for people to get what's going on. Like for example, we have the Abrams X. Obviously in one you have the cannon. Second, you got an explosive bullet, so you know that's gonna be an explosive machine gun. I believe at E you might not be able to tell that this is a drone sometimes, but there isn't really an easy way to showcase someone that using a drone. However, when you do fire it, you look up in the air and you see there's a red that's going forward, and whenever it's green, you know that it locks on. It's really simple and easy to get, even if you're a toddler and you just start playing this game for the first time. Now the next thing which I'm going to be moving into is that there isn't a definitive meta in a lot of the vehicle classes. There is a meta in some of them, however for the most part I don't believe there to be one. And the reason why I say this is due to the frequent balance changes which they give us. So right here, if we move into the helicopters, there isn't really the best helicopter that you can use, because if you, for example, want to be having a multi-role vehicle, you go for the Super Hind. If you want an amazing ground attacker in a vehicle with a lot of DPS that takes skill, you go for the Mi-24 Hind. If you want to use something that's an insane ground attacker from range, you can use the Longbow. If you want a ship counter, you could use the Apache. If you want stealth, you go for the RAD-66. There's just so many different options which you have. And another thing which also really improves the balancing here when it comes to vehicles is the cost efficiency. Some vehicles are cheaper than the others because they're clearly just a little bit worse. However, that makes it fine, because if you use a vehicle that, for example, costs you, I don't know, 9 parts, you gotta be really careful with it, because when you die, you're gonna be missing out on a lot of parts which you could have used to be spawning different vehicles. However, if you want to use something a little bit cheaper, then you can, and in that case, dying is not as painful as what it would be in other games. Since you're not outputting too much damage, you're also not gonna be losing out too many parts for it in return. I believe the previous part system was really scuffed because you kinda had like a limit of 3 parts, and then everything just costed around 2 parts as a whole. So back then there wasn't a point of spawning the more weaker vehicles in this game. However, now there actually is the cost efficiency meter. Another vehicle class which I could go over, which also doesn't have a definitive meta, is going to be the tanks, because for example right here, the Abrams X isn't actually the best tank like people used to think. You have things like the Terminator, the TOS Buratino, BMD, Challenger, Leopard 2ARC, E100, all of these different tanks are used for different things. Even when we take a look at planes, there isn't a definitive best multi-role jet which does everything the best. Like, it's the best dogfighter, it's the best at killing ships, the best at killing tanks, everything. That used to be the old F-35 Lightning which we had in the game. However, they decided to rework the plane as a whole, and now due to this, they give it different variants, so you gotta pick all these different variants for different roles. The F-35A for air-to-air, F-35B for killing people on the ground or killing ships, the F-35I probably for versatility, however you don't get too much of it, but you get it for a cheap cost. But anyway, for the time being, that's all I have for you guys in today's video. Do let me know in the comment section down below whatever things do you love about War Tycoon. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and do let me know whatever videos I should do that are similar to this.